I'd like you to imagine the following scenario. You have arrived in your new country, and within 3 months of your arrival, you have been diagnosed with cancer. How do you respond? Where do you go for help? Where do you find out where to go for help? As a result of this talk, I hope you will learn 2 important things. First, the importance of being properly prepared for emigration, and that includes language. And secondly, knowing something about an association in France where the help you need is available should you fall ill with cancer. When you fall ill in a foreign country, there are 3 things you need to have a handle on in order to be able to cope. Their language, they are cultural issues, and of course, understanding the health setup, how it works. Now, the scenario I began with is actually my story, because I arrived in France in July 2000, and by October, I had been diagnosed with breast cancer. I'd had 2 operations, and by the November, I was awaiting my radiotherapy. Now, as you can imagine, that was an incredibly stressful part of my life. And although I had good language skills, it wasn't very long before I felt my whole life was going out of control. And really, after I'd started my radiotherapy, I was very quickly in great psychological need, which my specialists recognised, and they put me into the psychological support services, which was wonderful. But of course, all that support was in, you got it, in French. When I was re-hospitalised to finish my radiotherapy, I started thinking. And I thought, great, I have language skills, I can cope just, but what must this situation be like for people arriving within the same kind of time scale, but without the language skills that I had? When I discussed this with my consultants, they said that I'd identified a real need that they had identified. With so many English speakers coming into the system, they just couldn't cope. And so the idea of creating an organisation to help English-speaking people in France grew. The association is called Cancer Support France, CSF it's known as generally, and it was created in 2001 as a result of those reflections and my experience. And we do really 3 things. We help patients access information, we provide emotional support, and we provide language support. So how does that work? You've heard it said that information is power, and one of the biggest things our patients need is information. Where do we find the information? And so we help direct clients to it if we can. Now, there is a cultural element to this problem, because although all the information is easily available, to access it, you've got to actually ask the right question of the right person in the right place at the right time. And that's the problem. And it's cultural, because here in France I've discovered that if you don't ask, the assumption is made that you already know or you don't want to know. I had a client who called me several years ago now, and she was really very stressed because she wanted to really understand what was going on, and her consultant wasn't giving her the information. So I had to explain to her, go back and tell him that as an English person, you need to know. Your culture gives you the information. So she went back and she did that, and a few days later I had a phone call from her, and she was absolutely thrilled to bits because it had worked. And at the end of the interview, her consultant had told her that it was the first time in the whole of his career that he'd had such an in-depth conversation with a patient. says something, doesn't it? Now, related to information is also knowing what your rights are. And that's something the French have difficulty with too. A conference I went to a couple of years ago actually flagged this up, that the French patient doesn't know what they're entitled to. And if they don't, what chance have we got? Now, one of the things they are entitled to is medical transport from home to consultation. And if you live in rural France, that's actually very important, because the journey time could be an hour and a half. And if you or your family are doing this driving, that adds to the stress of your illness. So information, access to information, is a major part of what we do. The second thing we do is to put a client in touch with a trained supporter whom we call an active listener. And that person is there not to tell the client what to do, but to help them express what they need to know, what they want to do. And through listening and helping them by asking open-ended questions, we're able to give the client a little bit more control back into their situation. And so an active listener will work with the client for as long as they need. The third thing we do is to put language support in place. Now, clearly, when you're preparing to move to a foreign country, you don't think about medical language, you learn about shopping language and social language. So when you fall ill and you're confronted with consent forms and hospital forms and information about this, that and the other, it's all in French, and if you haven't got French skills, it's tough. And if you're hospitalized, the nurses don't speak English. Well, why should they? So another very large piece of work that's developing in all our associations is to provide bilinguists who can act as an interpreter in that scenario. So what we've now got, 10 years after the creation of this association, are 15 associations dotted around the country, which really cover the area where English people have either holiday homes or permanent homes. And the associations there are much more local than we are at the national office. How do people access help from us? Well, there are two basic ways. The first one, and the obvious one, is to call our national helpline. If you're in France, it's 05 45 89 3005. It's basically on an answer phone, but my secretary will pick up the call and she'll return the call within 24 hours, and then she'll establish the need and where the client is and put a client and an association in touch with each other. Another good source of information about what we do is our national website, which is cancersupportfrance.org. And there is also a forum dedicated to people affected by cancer, where there's a lot of help available in a kind of chat situation. There's lots I could tell you. I haven't got time to give you absolutely everything, but do go onto the website if you're interested. You'll find lots of stuff there, information about cancer, links to different English-speaking websites, and lots of publications. I hope this very fleeting presentation has given you the two things you need. Prepare. There is an association in France where help is available. My story has a happy ending. I hope when you travel or emigrate, your stories also will have happy endings.